His teacher never paid him much attention
Your timing is
until
off,
the day
young
she
man.
chose to single him out in front of the whole class. But the moment he began to play, the expression on her face said everything. She hadn't seen it coming. Elijah Rivers sat by the window, tapping his pencil in rhythm against his notebook. It wasn't from anxiety, just a habit his mom always scolded him for. Still, it helped him think. The classroom at Jefferson Middle School in Little Rock, Arkansas, buzzed with pre-class murmurs. But Elijah stayed locked in on the worksheet in front of him. He preferred finishing early. At the front of the room stood Miss Abigail Thornton, reviewing her lesson notes. After nearly 15 years of teaching 6th grade, she'd earned a reputation, strict, but fair. At least, that's what her favorite students believed. Elijah wasn't one of them. She never made it obvious. No raised voice, no direct insults. But when he raised his hand, she rarely called on him. When he got a question right, she breezed past it. And on the rare occasion he was wrong, she lingered, almost like she enjoyed it. Elijah noticed. And so did a few others. "Yo, she hardly even sees you," Tyler Whitman, the boy sitting beside him, whispered one day. "You got like teacher invisibility or something." Elijah just shrugged. "Guess so." But today felt different. Miss Thornton kept glancing at him more than usual. Not in a warning way, but like she was waiting for something. Class began with a history lesson, the topic, the Civil War. Elijah listened carefully, expecting the usual routine. But then came a surprise. "Elijah," Miss Thornton said crisply, "why don't you take this one?" Heads turned. Elijah blinked. She never called on him. He straightened in his seat, glanced at the board. General Sherman's March to the Sea was a military campaign designed to destroy the Confederacy's infrastructure and morale, he answered. She said. "Not bad." It was a perfect response, straight from the textbook. A few classmates traded looks. Tyler gave him one that said, "What just happened?" The class continued, but something had shifted. Miss Thornton wasn't ignoring him anymore. She was watching. And just before the bell rang, she made her move. "Elijah," she said as the other students began packing up. "Stay for a moment." Heads turned again. No one said a word. Elijah packed slowly, then walked over to her desk. "I overheard something the other day," she said, hands folded. "About your grandfather." Elijah frowned. "What about him?" "You mentioned he was a musician." Something in her tone made the room feel heavier. "Yeah," he said. "He was a jazz pianist." Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Interesting," she said, leaning back. "So, you probably picked up a few things." Elijah hesitated. He didn't like where this was going. "A little," he said. "Good to know." Her grin widened, still missing any warmth. The bell rang. Elijah turned to leave. "Tomorrow," she said, stopping him. "Let's see what you've got." He turned back. "The piano." She nodded toward the dusty upright piano in the back corner of the classroom. "You'll play something for the class." Elijah stared. A few students had paused at the door, glancing over their shoulders. "Why?" he asked. She tilted her head, amused. "Why not? You said your grandfather played. I'm sure you've inherited some of that talent." Elijah recognized that tone. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't encouragement. It was a trap. But he wasn't going to back down. That night, Elijah barely slept. He stared at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. This wasn't a request. It was a test, and he knew exactly how she wanted it to go. She wanted him to choke, to prove her assumptions right. But she didn't know everything. The next morning, Elijah walked into class feeling the tension in the air. Word had gotten around. Whispers followed him to his seat. "You playing today?" Brandon Hall smirked from across the room. Elijah didn't reply. "Didn't know you played piano," Tyler whispered. Elijah stared at his notebook. "There's a lot people don't know," he said. Miss Thornton walked in, set her books down, and glanced at Elijah. She looked satisfied. Class began, but Elijah barely heard a word. His thoughts kept drifting to what was coming. And then, it happened. "Well," Miss Thornton said, closing her book and checking the clock. "We've got a few minutes." "Perfect." She turned to the piano. "Elijah, let's hear what you've got." The atmosphere shifted. Students adjusted in their chairs, whispering. Elijah didn't move immediately. He could feel every eye on him. His heart wasn't racing, but it beat steady and strong. Then he stood. A few soft chuckles echoed as he walked toward the piano. Someone whispered something, but he didn't need to hear it. He already knew. Miss Thornton folded her hands. "Play whatever you'd like." Elijah studied the piano. The keys were yellowed with age, some chipped. He ran his fingers across them, lightly. The instrument was slightly out of tune, but playable. He took a breath, sat down, and placed his hands on the keys. He knew exactly what he was going to play. And behind him, someone tried to hide a laugh. A low snicker echoed in the silence. It wasn't just about proving Miss Thornton wrong anymore. It was about showing everyone they had underestimated him. And he was going to do it in a way they'd never forget. The classroom had never been this silent. Even Miss Thornton, usually confident and composed, now wore an expression that bordered on intrigue. The students leaned in, waiting. Some anticipated a disaster. Others were just there to watch. Elijah set his hands on the piano keys. They felt familiar under his fingertips, even though this old classroom piano was nothing like the one at home. His grandfather's piano had a warmth to it, rich, full-bodied tones that could fill any room. This one. The keys were a bit stiff, the soundboard likely warped after years of neglect. He took a deep breath. A moment of calm. Then he began. The first notes floated into the air, gentle, measured, a slow blues riff, the kind his grandfather would play on sticky summer afternoons in Arkansas. Elijah's fingers moved smoothly, his left hand marking the rhythm while his right hand danced across the melody. The room shifted. Whispers faded. Even the kids who had been laughing earlier sat completely still. Miss Thornton crossed her arms. Her brow furrowed slightly. She hadn't expected this, not confidence. Not this level of skill. She thought he'd stumble. Elijah didn't look up. He wasn't playing for them now. This was for himself, for his grandfather. He lost himself in the music. Every note meant something. His hands floated across the keys, the sound a blend of feeling and control. This wasn't just playing, it was storytelling. Then he took a risk. He transitioned into something harder. His hands began to fly, intricate runs up and down the keyboard, a challenging passage his grandfather had once taught him. It had taken Elijah weeks to learn. Now, he nailed it. A deep bass rhythm supported a soaring melody above it, notes colliding, then resolving into harmony. The music filled every corner of the room, every space where doubt used to linger. No one laughed now. Tyler leaned forward in disbelief. Brandon, who had made jokes earlier, now sat with arms folded, stunned. A few students glanced around, their faces caught between shock and admiration. Then, the crescendo. Elijah's hands struck the final chords with purpose. The sound rose, swelling to a powerful climax, echoing against the classroom walls, filling every shadow of hesitation. And then, silence. The final note lingered in the air, then faded. Elijah let his hands fall to his lap. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, clap. It came from the back of the room. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the class erupted into applause. Tyler gave a low whistle. Damn. Brandon shook his head, almost in disbelief. I didn't know he could do that. Elijah exhaled. His heart wasn't racing from fear, but from the energy of what had just happened. He hadn't just performed, he had shifted something. The applause grew louder, students trading looks like they'd just witnessed something unforgettable. But the loudest silence came from Miss Thornton. She stood by her desk, arms crossed, face unreadable. She hadn't moved. Hadn't clapped. Hadn't spoken. Elijah sat quietly, breathing steady. No smile. No need for praise. He let the moment sit. Let them feel what had just happened. Finally, Miss Thornton spoke. Well, she said, voice sharp and clipped. That was unexpected. The clapping slowly died down. Students looked from her to Elijah. A few still whispered in amazement, but the mood had shifted. Where did you learn to play like that? She asked, head tilting slightly. Elijah met her eyes, steady. My grandfather. Something flickered across her face, but vanished too quickly to define. I see, she said. Then a pause. She tapped her fingers on her desk. The only sound in the hushed room. Then, as if snapping herself out of something, she turned to the class. All right. Let's continue our lesson. But no one moved. Elijah glanced around. Tyler still stared at him, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Madison Green, sitting in the back, looked almost irritated, like something beautiful had been cut short. Brandon muttered, That's it. Miss Thornton's eyes snapped toward him. Excuse me. Brandon shrugged. That's all you're gonna say? He just played like someone on TV, and you're just moving on. A few heads nodded in agreement. Miss Thornton's lips tightened. This is a classroom. Not a performance hall. Elijah steadied himself. You didn't think I could do it, did you? Her eyes narrowed. She didn't answer. He held her gaze. That's why you called me up here. Murmurs rippled across the room. Miss Thornton inhaled slowly. I simply offered you a chance to share your gift. Elijah shook his head. No, you didn't. You were setting me up to fail. His tone was calm, not angry. You wouldn't have asked Tyler. Or Madison. Or Brandon. But you asked me. Why? And in that moment, the entire room held its breath. Miss Thornton's jaw tightened. You're out of line. I don't think I am, Elijah replied calmly. Her eyes narrowed, her body going rigid. Sit down. But for the first time that year, Elijah didn't obey immediately. He looked around at his classmates, the ones who had ignored him, laughed at him, expected nothing from him. The same ones who chuckled when she said his name. Then, slowly, he stood. The silence now felt electric, heavier than before. And Miss Thornton, usually composed and in full control, looked slightly unsettled. But she wasn't the one in control anymore. Elijah made his way back to his seat, each step deliberate. His heartbeat was steady now. No more nerves. Just a strange, peaceful certainty. He sat down, the weight of every stare still pressing in from all sides. Tyler gave him a quiet nod, no words needed. Madison was still focused on Miss Thornton, arms crossed, clearly waiting for something more. But Miss Thornton had already turned away. She opened her lesson plan, eyes glued to the page, pretending like nothing had happened. "Let's move on." But the room didn't return to normal as quickly as she had hoped. The air still buzzed. Students whispered behind their hands. It wasn't just about music anymore. Brandon leaned back, arms folded. "Kinda weird how you don't want to talk about it." Miss Thornton's head snapped up. "Excuse me." Brandon shrugged. "You made it a big deal when he played. But now it's like you're pretending it didn't happen." A few quiet agreements rippled through the classroom. Her hands gripped the book tighter. "That's enough." But Elijah had noticed. The pause. The discomfort. So had the others. The rest of the class felt different. Miss Thornton went through the motions, but the rhythm was gone. Her authority, once firm, now felt fragile, like glass with a growing crack. When the final bell rang, chairs scraped and bags rustled as students gathered their things, whispering all the way out. Elijah slung his bag over one shoulder and started toward the door. But just as he stepped out, he stopped and turned. For a moment, she looked like she might say something real. Something honest. But then her face steeled. "I hope you understand this is still my classroom." Elijah looked at her, steady. Calm. "I know." A brief silence passed between them. Then he turned and walked out. Tyler caught up with him in the hallway. "Bro, what was that?" he said, grinning wide. "You just turned the whole place upside down." Elijah let out a breath. "Yeah?" Tyler nudged his shoulder. "You gonna play again?" Elijah thought about it, the feel of the keys, the music filling the room. He smiled. "Yeah. I think I will." Because today, he hadn't just played. He'd been heard. That afternoon, Elijah walked home lighter than he had in weeks. The sun was low over West Markham Street, casting long shadows as he followed the familiar path. The burden he'd carried, of doubt, of pressure, was gone. He stopped by the corner store for a bottle of water. Mr. Henson, the older man behind the counter, gave him a knowing look. "You look like someone who just did something that mattered." Elijah hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe I did." When he got home, the smell of fried catfish and cornbread welcomed him. His mom stood at the stove, humming while she flipped a fillet. "You're home late," she said. Elijah dropped his bag and sat at the kitchen table. "Had a long day?" "Good or bad?" she asked, turning her head slightly. He thought for a moment, about the silence in the room, Miss Thornton's expression, his classmates finally seeing him. "Good," he answered. "Really good." She turned off the stove, wiped her hands on a towel, and joined him at the table. "You want to talk about it?" Elijah nodded. And for 15 minutes, he told her everything. She didn't interrupt or rush him. She just listened. Her expression shifted between pride, concern, and something gentler, something sad. When he finished, she let out a long breath. "Sounds like you made her uncomfortable." "I think I did." She studied him. "And how do you feel about that?" He didn't need time to answer. Like it needed to happen. She smiled, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "Good." The next day at school, things weren't dramatically different, but they weren't the same either. Miss Thornton still taught with her usual structure. Still called on her favorites. Still pretended like nothing had changed. But the energy had shifted. Now, people looked at her differently. And they looked at Elijah differently too. At lunch, a few students, ones who'd never spoken to him before, came to his table. "Dude, You were insane on the piano, Madison said, sliding into the seat across from him. How long you been playing? Since I was 5. Tyler shook his head, laughing. Man, you've been holding out on us. Elijah smirked. Guess so. Across the cafeteria, Miss Thornton walked by, tray in hand. Their eyes met briefly. This time, she looked away first. And Elijah? He just kept eating. He'd already said everything that needed to be said. Because some lessons can't be found in textbooks. And some moments change how people see the world, whether they are ready or not. Miss Thornton had spent the entire year overlooking him. And in just a few minutes, he made sure she never would again. Maybe she'd never admit it. Maybe she'd never speak it aloud. But that didn't matter. Because now Elijah understood something she didn't. When people try to silence you, when they doubt you, the strongest answer is to let your talent speak louder than their judgment. And when you do, they can't ignore you anymore.